What's up guys, Mike here, the Detroit Borg, checking out the brand new Apple TV 4K. And it starts off at $179 or $199 for two sizes, 32 or 64 gig capacities. You can still buy the 1080p Apple TV for $149, but that also got a slight update with a slightly redesigned remote controller and some new fonts on the top of the Apple TV. But we're going to focus on the 4K model and start with the unboxing. Now for the most part, the hardware looks very similar on the outside, but there's a few differences we'll get into. So the Siri remote design is pretty much carried over. We still have a trackpad toward the top, a smooth glassy surface toward the bottom, and to make the orientation clearer, we now have a raised white ring surrounding the menu button. Although it's a very subtle change, it does make using this remote controller a lot easier. Now the top is a glass trackpad that clicks, so we have a physical click here, and for the most part the trackpad is very responsive, although it can be a little finicky. We also have a dual microphone, so you'll see it pass through on the front and the back, so this does work with Siri. Toward the bottom we'll find a lightning connector, which is symmetrically balanced with the IR blaster at the top of the remote. So when you connect your Apple TV to either an AV receiver or a television set, you can actually control the volume from the included Siri remote automatically. Next up, we have the Apple TV itself wrapped in plastic, and the dimensions of this are identical to the previous model. But there is a slight change, which you'll notice on the bottom, and that's because we have ventilation and a fan built into the Apple TV, and that's because it's running a bit hotter, and that's because we have that A10 CPU, which is doing a few other things besides just powering 4K video. It's also upscaling video to 4K and HDR. By default, the Apple TV upscales all content to 4K, whether it's in that format or not, and if your TV supports it, it will also upscale to either HDR10 or Dolby Vision. But this is something you can change under settings, and we'll get to that. Also included is a power cable with that typical Apple design with that nice smooth plug, so it looks a bit different than any other plug you might put into your power outlet, so you know right away which one is the Apple TV, which is kind of handy. Also in the box is some paperwork with a quick start guide and a set of Apple stickers. And lastly, we get a lightning cable for recharging the internal battery of the Siri remote. Now personally, from my experience, the Siri remote battery lasts a really long time, at least a month with heavy use. There are some other significant internal differences, so we have an A10X Fusion processor instead of the A8. We also get some new wireless technology such as Bluetooth 5 instead of 4. The ports have also been updated. Obviously we needed an HDMI 2 port instead of the 1.4 on the 1080p model. And we also go from a 10 base T Ethernet port to full gigabit Ethernet. And although the Apple TV 4K does not have a USB-C port, you can use Wi-Fi to remotely access the device, including for screen recording. And if you have a sharp eye for fonts, you'll notice a change here with a new generation, and this applies actually to the old one as well, so they actually updated it just for the font style. And I'm not a font expert, but the top of the T on the new font is flat instead of angled. Now it's very important to keep in mind that you will need your own 4K capable HDMI cable because one is not included. In fact, Apple sells one from Belkin that looks a lot like Apple's previous HDMI cable. Setup on the Apple TV is pretty simple. Once you select your language and country, all you have to do is select whether you want to set up this device manually or use another device to transfer your information, such as an iPhone. So in that case, all you have to do is hold your device near the Apple TV, and this will initiate the setup sequence. So essentially this transfers your account information and Wi-Fi setup to the Apple TV from your iPhone, and all you have to do is enter in your iTunes password. Now if your TV provider supports it, we also have universal sign-in. So for apps that require authentication with the provider, the Apple TV will automatically enter in that information, so you don't have to do it with each app. Another new feature with tvOS 11 that makes setup really easy is home screen syncing. So this will automatically sync your home screen between Apple TV devices. So if you have this set up on another Apple TV, this will automatically install the apps from your previous Apple TV and arrange them in the order you had them, including the folders. You can also enable location services, and you can also automatically download new video screensavers. Next up is the setup process for Dolby Vision or HDR. Now the Apple TV can recognize whether your TV supports it or not, but you have to make sure that your TV actually has enabled that feature on the HDMI port. Now some TVs will prompt you to restart in order to switch to the HDR mode. Now once you've verified that your TV supports HDR or Dolby Vision, you get it full time, so the entire interface and every single video is upscaled to that HDR format. format. Now, I think the primary reason Apple prefers to do it this way is to avoid the interruption of mode switching, which is one of the problems of HDR. 4K HDR is becoming more widely available on streaming services such as Netflix, Vudu, and Amazon. So it's actually pretty easy to get a demo of this right out of the box, assuming you have those services available to you. And the other great news is that most new releases through iTunes also support 4K and HDR. And if you're like me with a large library of movies, everything that is available with 4K HDR will automatically be upscaled free of charge. In fact, HD movies and 4K movies cost the same, so there's no difference or price increase. Unfortunately, one of the biggest sources for 4K content on the internet, YouTube, does not work fully with the Apple TV, so you cannot get 4K through YouTube on the Apple TV, and that's because YouTube is using the VP9 standard, which Apple does not support. One of the other issues right now is that Apple TV does not support Dolby Atmos, but apparently that's coming with a future software update, so right now I don't think it's a big issue. So it goes without saying that you do need a 4K TV to take full advantage of the Apple TV 4K, but this will automatically scale to the correct format and resolution of the TV you connect it to. So even if you have an older TV, this will work with it. But to take full advantage of what the Apple TV can output, you need a fairly recent high-end 4K TV with Dolby Vision that runs at 60 Hz, and not all 4K TVs support this yet. So for example, my LG 65-inch B6 OLED from last year does not support 60 Hz Dolby Vision, but my E7 from this year does. And that's a very expensive high-end OLED TV, but definitely the best way of experiencing your Apple TV. Now, just like the previous generation, the Apple TV 4K is also a gaming platform, and it's basically the same iOS gaming platform on your iPhone. So the included Siri remote can also be used for gaming. It has an accelerometer, can be used in a horizontal orientation, but you can also pair a Bluetooth gamepad for a more traditional gaming experience. Now, if you don't like the Siri remote, you can use your iOS device. In fact, the Control Center has a specific toggle for the Apple TV. So you can select the Apple TV you want to control, and you can use the touchscreen on your iOS device just like you would on the Siri remote, including a touchpad for scrolling through the interface, our menu, play, pause, and home buttons, in addition to using the volume controls for adjusting the volume on the TV or home theater. And if you have an Apple Watch, there's also a remote app there which has the same functions. Wireless screen recording works pretty well, and it's pretty easy to set up. You do need a computer running Mac OS High Sierra, and assuming they're connected on the same Wi-Fi network, all you have to do is go to QuickTime and go to Video Recording. You should see the Apple TV on your network as one of the cameras, and you can connect directly to it. You will need to authenticate with the code that the Apple TV throws up, and once you start the screen recording, the screen is outlined in red, just to let you know that it's being captured. In terms of the OS, this is TV OS 11, which has been upscaled to 4K with HDR, so it looks extremely crisp on our 4K TV. But overall, the interface hasn't changed that much at all. It's pretty familiar. So I can mouse around using the Siri trackpad or the Siri remote trackpad, and then I can select any app I want to launch into. That includes search, settings, and much more. Now, when I mouse around this top row, you can see I get a preview of what each item holds in the top row. So that gives me access to movies, TV shows, the App Store, and my photo gallery. Now, you can modify this as well. So all I have to do is tap and hold, and this allows us to move these around. So if I want to move this out of the top row, I can certainly do that. Now for apps that I've installed, such as YouTube here, what I can do is tap and hold and drag it over top of another app to create a folder. So I can create as many folders as I want. I click to drop it in place. Now if I go back to the editor here, so again, I'm in this editing mode, if I press the pause play button for more options, this allows me to delete the app. So this will uninstall the app, or I can move it to one of the other folders I have, or move it back to the home screen. So this interface is a bit different than something like iOS. Now, if I take a look at one of these titles, such as War of the Planets, since this is a newer movie, I should see some options up top, which indicates that this is available in 4K and HDR. Now, this title is not available in Dolby Vision, but some of them are. So, for example, if I go to Baby Driver, you'll see that this is available in Dolby Vision, not just HDR. I think Dolby Vision is a much better HDR standard than HDR10, which is what most formats use. Now, the great news here is that any purchase you've made previously will be upgraded automatically to 4K and HDR if it's available. So for example, with Alien Covenant, I purchased this as an HD title, but it's been upgraded to 4K. There's a few tricks to know about with the Siri remote. So for example, if you long press the menu key, this will take you back to the home screen. A single press will just take you back to the previous screen. Now, if you double press the home key, This will actually bring you to the multitasker or the recent apps view. So this allows you to cycle through the previous apps and you can quickly jump between them. And if you want to swipe up to dismiss them, you can, just like you would on iOS. And if you long press the pause play button, this will give you the option to switch between different speakers. So if you want to output the audio to different devices, you get an option list right here. Now, if you hit the home key, this will take you back to the TV app. Now, this app aggregates all of the media across all of your apps. So this is a one-stop location for everything, although not all apps participate, such as Netflix. So for example, the Orville is from the Fox Now app, which you can see in the upper right corner. Will and Grace is from the NBC app, as well as Star Trek Discovery, which is from the CBS app. So as long as I've logged into those apps and they're installed on my Apple TV, all of that will be integrated into this one app, and it's pretty handy, although again, Netflix is not included, which is where I spend most of my time. Siri remains a big part of the interface for the Apple TV. So for example, we can bring up a search for one of the titles we might want to watch. Play Star Trek Discovery. So that's a very specific search, and this will take me to the CBS app, which plays Star Trek Discovery and picks up where I last left off. But I can also tell it to do things such as skip ahead 10 seconds. Skip ahead 20 seconds. What did he just say? So this will replay it and give me the captions for that segment. Now, while I'm watching the video, I can also do one of my favorite things. What's the weather like tomorrow? So it's going to bring up the search results, pause, playback in the background so I can quickly look at that and click the menu button to resume what I was watching. I can also pause playback. You can see the scrubber down below, and I can swipe across on the timeline to select it. Now, different apps will behave differently. So for example, in iTunes, I would get a preview of what I was scribing to. In the case of the CBS All Access app, I don't get that capability. I can also be less specific. Play a good science fiction movie. So this gives me some suggestions. So for example, I can see Blade Runner, but I can't play that right now because that's in theaters. But let's go ahead and select that and see what it tells me. So there we go. We have the option to pre-order it for $19.99. We can also preview this or add it to our wish list. You can see a brief synopsis of this movie as well as who's in it or who directed it. Now, if you swipe down, you get to trailers. You can see the rating, the Rotten Tomatoes score, and some quick info on the cast. So one of the first things you really want to take a look at when you get your Apple TV 4K is settings and video and audio. So one of the things you want to take a look at here is format. So right now I'm in 4K HDR, which is HDR10. What I'm not seeing here is Dolby Vision on this TV, and that's because this TV doesn't support Dolby Vision at 60 Hz. It only supports it at 30 Hz. You might find that to be the case with your TV as well. So we have a number of formats we can select. So if you want to turn off HDR, you can do that, because otherwise HDR is on all the time, so it converts everything to HDR, either Dolby Vision or HDR10. And you can also see that 60 Hz is prioritized here, so you only see 60 Hz resolutions, but we can go to other formats and select quite a few others. So one of the formats I want to select here is Dolby Vision at 30 Hz. Now, the only problem with 30 Hz is that the interface looks much slower. Now, I'm not going to select that right now just because it's going to interrupt my screen recording here, but personally, I prefer Dolby Vision at 30 Hz because with video, I don't really want to watch it at 60 Hz anyway, and the interface is fast enough, so I don't really care that it looks a bit choppier than it does at 60 Hz. Now, right before I published this review of the Apple TV 4K, Apple released a beta version of tvOS 11.2, which fixes a major issue with the Apple TV, which was the universal upscaling. So you either had universal upscaling and HDR turned on or turned off. But with the updated software, you'll see a new option under video and audio. And that allows you to select whether you want to match the dynamic range or the frame rate or both. So that means the Apple TV will switch to the right dynamic range or resolution depending on the content. The only issue with this, and the reason it's not on by default, is that there can be a delay when switching between the different modes, so it looks kind of slow. Now, if you're using one of the compatible formats such as 4K HDR, we get a new setting called Chroma. Now, this allows us to change the compression of luminance and color data. So by default, it's set to 4:2:0, but if you want to reduce the compression and improve the vibrancy and sharpness of those colors and tones on your screen, you can go with 4:2:2. If you want to know more about Chroma subsampling, I'll leave that linked in the description below so you can find out more. So digging into settings and taking a look at general, if you go to About, you'll see the complete stats for this device. You'll see which version of tvOS you're running. You'll see the model number. You'll even see the screen resolution with the Chroma setting. Under Appearance, we get a dark mode. So light mode is on by default, but if you want a dark mode, you can kick that in. And if we go back to the home screen here, you can see the entire interface now gets this darker background, which I actually like. Now, if you want to select automatic, this will kick in automatically with the sunset and sunrise, kind of like the night mode on your iPhone. We can also manage storage. So if you want to see the storage on the device, you can see what apps are taking up the most storage and delete them if you want. We have background app refresh as well. So that's turned on by default, and you can see certain apps that are using it, such as podcasts. Under accounts, besides the obvious, such as our Apple accounts, we also have our TV provider, so we can set that up here. We can set up home sharing, and we can manage our subscriptions. So if you subscribe to any services through iTunes, you'll see them right here, such as CBS All Access. In terms of sound output, we have several options. We have best quality available, Dolby Digital 5.1, or stereo only. Under remotes and devices, you can change the touch surface tracking. It's set to medium by default, but you can select fast or slower. We can also change the behavior of the home button. Now, previously, it used to take you to the home screen, but now it takes you to the TV app by default, but you can customize that right here. So if you want to go back to the home screen instead, this is where you can change that. We can also see the battery status of the connected remote controller. So right now it's at 87%. If I connect my cable here, you should see it starts charging right away. In terms of Bluetooth, this is where we can connect other devices, such as my headphones. So because I'm using my iCloud account, it automatically syncs my W1 devices, such as my AirPods and Beats X headphones. So all I have to do is select connect, and it connects right to my earpods. You can also connect to other devices or a Bluetooth keyboard if you prefer. Under home theater controls, the Apple TV can control connected devices such as your TV or receiver, and you can select how this controls your volume on those devices, whether it's through IR or through HDMI if that's available. Under apps, we have a lot of settings which are worth digging into here. So for example, you can select automatic updates or automatic installs if you want. Certain apps have settings to know about. So for example, the TV app allows you to select what content plugs into the TV app. So if you want to disconnect some of these apps, you can do so right here. Now personally, I'm a big fan of the Apple TV 4K. It attempts to really simplify what's a really complicated issue with 4K and HDR, and I really like the results. I also really like that all of my content has been upgraded to the 4K and HDR resolution where available, which I think is a huge value add. But of course, set-top boxes are becoming less important, especially on high-end TVs with 4K or HDR. Most of those already have built-in services, and some of them are quite good, such as the WebOS interface on LG TVs. But this is really the only solution for the complete Apple ecosystem. You get all of your iTunes content on your TV, along with AirPlay or screen mirroring, and the ability to remotely control your Apple TV from any iOS device. But eventually, I think the best solution is to build the Apple TV software into a TV set, so hopefully we'll see that in the future eventually. Alright guys, hope you enjoyed this look at the Apple TV 4K. If you guys enjoyed this video, please let me know with a like, and I'll see you again in my next video.